Hello, folks. Welcome to an information presentation on the Annual Representative Assembly. This presentation focuses on the annual budget, information, and procedures. The first thing to understand about the budget is the Budget Workbook. The Budget Workbook is considered by locals in February prior to the Annual Representative Assembly in May. The workbook contains questions related to program changes that are a highlight of the budget changes being proposed for the new fiscal year. This is the easiest place to modify funding proposals for the upcoming year, and it's your opportunity to provide feedback on the proposals being forwarded by Provincial ATA's Finance Committee and Provincial Executive Council. The Budget Workbook has comments that you can make comments in the Budget Workbook that are reviewed by Provincial's Finance Committee. Now, there are a variety of ways that you can do this. First, Local 38 will be submitting a group presentation in the Budget Workbook to Finance Committee. This stems from comments received at the February delegate meeting where we review the budget information. You can also submit an individual comment via the Budget Workbook to Finance Committee for their consideration. The detailed budget, a hard copy of which is provided to all ARA delegates, gives a detailed listing of all budgeted expenditures and revenues for the Provincial Association, organized by program area and item. All of these items are subject to debate at ARA, while the pre-delegate meeting in February will focus primarily on the Budget Workbook, although questions about any item of the budget can be asked at either venue. In terms of the budget session at the Annual Representative Assembly, the budget session begins with a motion to introduce the budget and move into closed session. The main budget motion is then moved, and then Provincial Executive Council members will introduce each program area, section by section, describing the changes contained therein. It would then be appropriate for members, delegates, to ask questions, make comments, or move motions about particular sections. During that section of the budget, you must take action if you wish to seek changes. Once a program area is declared closed, you can only revisit it if the House approves a motion to reconsider. This can be difficult to achieve. Upon completion of the budget, a final vote on the main motion will be held. Delegates will often ask what changes they are permitted to make to the budget itself. First, you cannot do the following. You cannot delete lines or delete programs entirely in the budget section. It is appropriate to do this elsewhere via motion during the Annual Representative Assembly. You also cannot make changes to the summary page. If you wish to change items on the summary page, it would be appropriate to move changes to individual lines within that section of the budget. You can also not modify salary or benefit lines for ATA staff. There are collective agreements in place, and modifying these puts the association in a precarious legal position. In a similar fashion, you cannot remove the ATA from a group membership. There are agreements in place, for example, with CTF that have specific withdrawal requirements. Moving a motion outside of the budget is the appropriate place and venue in which to effect that kind of a change. Finally, if you wish to do something that changes an element of the budget but causes the association to abrogate a legal liability, that would also not be permitted. Changes that you can make to the budget include increasing or decreasing amounts in a particular line. You can certainly ask questions during the budget of any line item that you wish. And you can also move something from one area of the budget to another. For example, from the rebatable section to the non-rebatable section, or vice versa. Delegates will often ask as well, what happens if there is a budget surplus in the previous fiscal year? There are audited financial statements presented at ARA that will show whether the previous school year ended with a surplus or a deficit. Now, any surplus created shifts to the balance sheet and sits as member equity. It's important to note at this point that the accounting methodologies used by locals differs from those used by the provincial association. Most locals will use what's called checkbook accounting, where there is a single fund and there are various debits and expenditures and revenues that are collected that modify that single total. However, provincial uses what's called accrual accounting, which is a process and methodology that is more common for larger organizations. This creates other non-cash lines. Several expenditures, costs, or surpluses are not cash related as a result. So this creates some additional complexity. Some lines do create cash surpluses, but others, such as amortization and depreciation lines, do not. These are non-cash value. And so while the audited financial statements might appear to show a large fund that seems available, it is mostly committed to other liabilities, such as non-cash items. The biggest concern that delegates will often have during the budget debate is about member fees. If there is an intention to change member fees, the association, it's important to note first, the association generally produces balanced budgets. So what this means is that the total value of program expenditures will equal the amount of revenue that the association intends to take in during a fiscal year. Now, the association's revenue comes heavily from member dues, so the expenditures should roughly equate to the dues that are taken in. As a general rule, however, if you intend to reduce the annual member fee by $3 per member per year, there would be a necessity to remove approximately $100,000 of spending from the budget. Now, deficit budgets are possible. It's been done in the past. What this would involve is setting a member fee that collects less than the total value of all the anticipated program expenditures. This creates a deficit, but it does have a negative impact on the association's financial liquidity. It's not recommended that this happen because what we've seen in the past is that it does create cash flow issues for the provincial association. Another way of changing member fees is to transfer items from one section of the budget to the other. Now, you might ask how that changes member fees if you're just moving things around on paper, but it's at this point that it's important to understand that the budget has two parts. The first part of the budget, where the majority of proposed programs go, is called the rebatable section of the budget. This means that any amount that is spent here is subject to a 20% rebate to locals. So for every dollar that's required to fund those programs at the provincial scale, you have to collect $1.25 from members in order to create that 20% local rebate. The second part of the budget is the non-rebatable section. These programs tend to fall outside of the scope of normal association operations, but for each dollar that you collect or spend in that area, only $1 needs to be collected from members. So if you move something from the rebatable section to the non-rebatable section, what you're doing is you are reducing member fees because you are driving lower the amount that is rebated to locals themselves. During the budget debate, there's a specific format for motions and the manner in which you present yourself at the microphone. The first thing you should always do is identify yourself using your last name and identifying your local. For example, Nellis, Calgary Public, Local 38. There are several motions that you're likely to make during the budget debate. The first is a request for information. This is used when you have a question that needs to be answered. So it's a request for information and not a request to provide information. You are not debating. The request for information section is a priority motion, so you can make a motion to request for information and seek the information and jump ahead of the queue. If you want to amend the budget, you would move, and you have to have a seconder for this, to amend the budget by increasing or decreasing a particular line item. If you have multiple lines that you wish to modify, it's recommended that you do so one at a time. Finally, there's another motion to amend the budget by transferring a program or a line from one section of the budget to the other. This also requires a seconder and follows the principle discussed earlier from transferring from rebatable to non-rebatable. You might often hear somebody call the question at ARA. Now, when you are in the budget debate, you must exercise some caution when calling the question because there are two types. The first is a motion to call the question. What this means is that the mover wishes to end debate on that particular amendment being discussed and vote on that amendment right now. If, however, you move to call all previous questions, what you are seeking to do is end debate on this amendment, vote on it right now, and then immediately vote on the main budget motion. This would effectively end all discussion on every element of the budget at that moment, if it is approved. So calling all previous questions is less likely to succeed during the budget debate unless you feel the delegates as a whole are prepared to end discussion on the entire budget. If you miss moving a motion during a particular section of the budget, you would need to move a motion to reconsider a closed section. The format for this motion is as follows. You would move to reconsider the particular program area in question of the budget, and this is a motion that requires to be passed by 2/3 majority of the Assembly. There are a variety of other questions you might have about the budget, and we encourage you to ask them. Please approach the executive staff or your ARA committee members with these questions, and we will be happy to assist you. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great ARA.